So today at the Labour Party conference, I was there at an event with Andy Burnham, and he was being asked a lot of different questions, stuff about English devolution, stuff about, his time as mayor, about how Labour can try and win the next general election, and all kinds of other weird and wonderful things in the world of British politics. But two things that stood out to me were what he said about public transport and what he said about proportional representation. So we recorded a little bit of what he said about proportional representation. So let's have a look at that and talk about it, and then we'll discuss some of the other stuff, the public transport stuff.
I mean, the danger is though that MPs become sort of super councillors or something. And I know some of the newly elected Conservative MPs. They are just playing the Facebook game. There's a controversy in a certain part of the constituency. Right, I'm there and I'm going there, and then there's another one. And I can see that happening, and I think that's almost taking politics down a level. And but MPs are not, I don't think, often operating at the level they should be operating at. They've kind of gone hyper-local, and that is a problem, because they're then kind of cutting across councillors, they're cutting across, but I definitely observed that has happened. And all I can say is, if I look like I'm enjoying this job, it's because I am, because I feel liberated from some of that system. When you've got an MP that's just looking after 70,000 people in quite a small area, that's going to create that kind of parochialism, isn't it? And particularly in this sort of Facebook age, it's going to mean people are leaping on the hyper-local. I've come round to proportional representation for a number of reasons, but one, I believe the Commons would function better in the national interest if MPs were looking more at the region as opposed to a tiny sort of constituency, and also freed from the whip actually, to be able to advocate for that region and use leverage for that region, working, so a good example is the HS2 bill is coming to the Commons quite soon, and it's going to be bad news for Greater Manchester, and I think it's going to be terrible news for West Yorkshire. I think, I'm only from the rumours I'm hearing, we're going to get a station that we think we need an underground station. They're going to build out on the level because it's cheaper, and they're going to take all of our development land around Piccadilly. West Yorkshire, we're hearing, is going to be chopped all together. I believe Northern MPs should be, when that bill comes to Parliament, should be free to work across party political lines to get the right deal for the north of England. But the whip system sort of operates against that. It just says, no, you've got to vote for what we're... And that's what I'm saying. I think the Commons you would be creating a Commons that can actually level up if you had MPs in there who are empowered to be a bit more independent advocates for the region, rather than the system that we've currently got. And I do think you've touched on a really important issue there.
So the argument that Andy Burnham is making there is one that I actually haven't heard before in favour of proportional representation. I was really, really thrilled when he came out in favour of it in the interview. And it was something I was hoping he was going to support, and he said that he came around to the idea and things like that, rather than having always supported it, which of course is a lovely sign when a politician comes around to a good idea, because the evidence shows them that it's a good idea. And that argument that actually it means MPs are going to start serving their region rather than just running around their individual small, very, very small constituency, going to different events in public, going to different sort of mini crises, and just being there for a PR thing, and then swanning off to the next one, and not actually really doing much, and not fighting for the greater good of the entirety of the UK and the entirety of their region. I think that is a really, really interesting argument for proportional representation, and that kind of thing is the arguments that Labour needs to be making in favour of it. I know that Labour, the Labour leadership under Keir Starmer, and in fact, I think every single Labour leadership has supported first past the post rather than proportional representation. This one hasn't spoken about it, but I think it's fair to say that they won't support it. But Andy Burnham was making the case for that. And of course, it's just a much more democratic and much fairer electoral system. So that was really fascinating, and I think, Andy Burnham is so articulate. He's very personable. He comes across so well. He just seems like an ordinary guy who just wants to improve people's lives, and that is leadership. That is leadership, and I think he really is an exquisite politician. He really is one of a kind. He reminds me a bit of Tony Benn in one way, I suppose, although he is very different. But yeah, so that was really interesting. Another thing that he mentioned that we didn't manage to record footage for was he was talking about public transport and how the whole levelling up agenda that the Tories have been talking about isn't one that is actually manifested in reality in the north of England. And as someone who's from the north of England, I live in the north of England, I can attest to that. We haven't seen any industrial or infrastructural development. Our public transport systems are still way worse than they are in the south of England. And these are issues that continue to exist in places in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland as well. But at least they have, devolved administrations. Especially the Welsh Labour government has done a lot of good in terms of their public services and things. And what he was saying was basically that they were going to develop a £1 billion fund to actually level up lots of places in the north, including Greater Manchester, obviously, as he's the mayor of Greater Manchester. And I really, really liked that. But he went into quite a lot of detail about what it was about, and I can't obviously repeat verbatim what he said, but he wanted to get public transport to be as cheap and as high quality as it is in London, at the very least. They wanted something called I think he called it the Beehive Initiative or the Bee Fleet or something like that, of basically these fully electric buses and electric trams. The trams already run on renewable energy, but he wants to do that with all of the buses in Greater Manchester, and they'd be, or the Beehive Network, that's what it might have been. And they were going to be yellow. They're going to be yellow and black in colour, hence Beehive. And essentially, he wants to ensure that the quality and the cost are at least as good as things are in London. And he said, he thinks it even works from a political perspective, because if Westminster gives him the billion, and then it doesn't work very well, then they can blame him for wasting it and say, oh, how terrible is this Labour mayor Andy Burnham, he's always shouting and mouthing off, and then he doesn't get the real work done. But if it does work, they can take credit for it, because they say, oh well, we gave them that billion to use in the north, we gave them that money for Greater Manchester. So he's thinking about it in terms of how it would work politically, as well as, of course, the more important aspect of it, which is implementing it practically and improving people's lives. And one of those things was that, if you spend more than £4 in a day on buses in London, you spend no more than that, right? It won't go higher than that. Whereas you spend £4 just on one bus fare in Greater Manchester. He wants to get it the same as it is in London. And of course, he was talking about all these great policies like English devolution. He was, talking about dealing with climate change, and clearly he supports, public ownership of essential utilities and things like that. He's taken the buses in Greater Manchester under public control as mayor, which I think was a fantastic thing to do, and it'll enable them to improve the quality of the buses and make them cheaper, like we've said. And he had a lot of advice for the Labour leadership on how they should deal with things, and it really should be heeded, if that's the past tense of the word heed. I'm actually not sure, but he has a lot of wisdom, because he's there in a unique position, and he's talking to ordinary people a lot. He's in a region that has been sort of devoid of a significant amount of political power for a long time, devoid of enough investment for a long time. It's even worse in the northeast, but of course The mayor of my hometown is a Tory, and he, isn't really making a fuss about trying to get more autonomy or more investment there, other than Teesside Airport. So, there are a lot of really great ideas coming from Andy Burnham, and I think I'd definitely like to see him return to Westminster politics, because he wants to essentially dismantle that and create a much more federalised system, with English devolution, more power in the hands of working people, more power in the hands of ordinary people, more investment, actual levelling up policies, making the UK a world leader in renewable industry and renewable energy. And one of the best things he said was his social care plan. You can read it online. When he was in the shadow cabinet from 2010 to 2015, he released this fantastic social care plan, which was really needed then, and is even more sorely needed now. And he basically calls it social care on NHS terms, which I love. I think that's a really great policy. So Andy Burnham is one to watch, as I'm sure you probably all know. And Greater Manchester are lucky to have him. It was really, really great to hear him speak today. So I'd like to hear your thoughts, though. What do you think of Andy Burnham? Do you think he's all bark and no bite, all talk and no walk, or do you think he is a real 21st century politician? He understands the problems that we're facing and he genuinely cares? I fall very, very firmly into the latter category. But yeah, I'm interested to hear your thoughts. As always, thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.